America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jordan Bruno, vice president of Job Creators Network.
And you can subscribe to the show at SalemPodcastNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, we're joined by Steve Trussell. Steve is the executive director of the Arizona Rock Products Association and the Arizona Mining Association. He's joining us today to discuss the homelessness crisis in Arizona that is hurting small businesses. Steve, welcome to Main Street Matters.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into the crisis at hand, tell us a little bit about your organizations and what you do.
Sure. So I'm the executive director of two trade organizations that represent mining in Arizona. One of them is the Arizona Rock Products Association, and the other was Arizona Mining Association, as you pointed out. And we have three main goals for the organization, which include regulatory work, community relations, and policy work at the federal, state, and local level.
Well, I think we all touch on some of those issues. We do a lot in the regulatory area and economic issues at the federal level for small businesses. So I can relate to some of the at least the processes you go through. We probably work on different issues, but the processes you're dealing with and some of the same folks. So, well, now that we know a little bit about what you're doing, tell us about the homelessness crisis in Phoenix. And how it is hurting small business and kind of hurting the city at large.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. It has been something that's ramped up over time. As you're well aware, you probably are familiar with the zone and a lot of the coverage that received.
We're not, actually. Can you tell our listeners about the zone?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I apologize. So the zone was an area that was designated by the city that basically was an encampment for over 1,000 folks that, and it's, I want to say less than 2 blocks from my office and about 2 blocks from the Arizona State Capitol. So it's really kind of in the state corridor, or what I refer to as a state corridor, because it's got a lot of the agency buildings and so forth. But there's some businesses intermingled there. So to the west, you've got the Arizona State Capitol, and moving east, you have those state buildings I referred to, and then you've got county buildings, so Maricopa County, and then the city of Phoenix, and a lot of their municipal buildings, and that includes a lot of businesses, but not a lot interspersed in there. And unfortunately, there were some safety issues associated with that. Certainly cleanliness issues. We were finding trash just about everywhere, left every night. We'd go out and open the gate, and I'd be out there in the morning. I usually get in around 6 a.m. And, if it wasn't asking people, to pick up their things and leave, it was picking up trash, which included some dangerous things such as hypodermic needles and, the little tinfoil, drug paraphernalia type tinfoil and things like that. Really, I learned you shouldn't be, touching. So we had to grab them with tongs and different things like that to pick them up. We had issues with theft. So I had, my truck broken into. I found a gentleman actually sitting in my car, just going through all my stuff, taking what he wanted. He clearly was on drugs, and it's a difficult situation because you don't really know what to do and if the police can respond, because that creates a whole different issue because of the fact that our police force is down over 500 officers. So a lot of vandalism. You probably saw the pictures on the Fox piece that we did, and it's all up and down the alley. People would pile trash up against the building and light it on fire. That happened several times. A couple times I went out with an extinguisher and put out smaller fires, but larger fires were put out by the fire department. And they would tell me, Steve, you've got one of the worst alleys in the city. And it's just because it's an area, it's a corridor between where the zone is and where food is being served by, some of the nonprofits that are out there helping. My hat is off to those who serve in that respect. We support the Phoenix Rescue Mission. They do an exceptional job of getting people who want services off the street. There are many others. But there's a lot of folks that just don't want help. And it's unfortunate. There has been lewd acts, in public, in the alley, folks walking down the street without any clothes on that are just either mentally ill or on drugs. Unfortunately, we've had people living on our roof, believe it or not. They were able to shimmy up there and we didn't know that they were up there. Ended up going up and removing everything from the roof. And then they got angry about that. And somebody went up, broke a skylight, and dropped burning paper through the skylight, trying to light our building on fire. So we've dealt with a lot of that. I don't mean to ramble on, but I mean, safety of my employees is of paramount importance to me. Folks follow them to their cars, asking them for money or help or any number of other things. Some folks have threatened employees or myself. In fact, just recently, just 2 weeks ago, I had a gentleman knocking on the door. The receptionist was a little, concerned for her safety. I went out there, asked him to leave. He said he was going to kill me. Basically, he finally left and then started following a young woman who was walking down the street. Security at one of the state buildings came out and took care of that matter. But, it's just an ongoing saga. So.
Can you explain to our listeners a little bit about how the homeless population, both in size and scope and personalities, changed over the past several years? And what do you think's driving the increase?
Well, drugs are rampant in Arizona. Obviously, where there's a drug corridor, from our border, and you're probably well aware of the border situation here. I certainly think drugs and mental health issues not being addressed, not to mention the fact that housing prices are at an all-time high in Arizona. The interest rates are super high. Housing availability is a challenge. And so all of those things, homelessness has really taken on several different forms. You've got folks that literally live in this alley. And if you saw the pictures of the alley behind my building, it's a rough place to be. And I don't know how people can dwell back there, but they also live on the streets. So, all the city buildings shut down at night. There's not a lot of activity down in the Capitol corridor. And there are a lot of folks that park their cars. Some of these cars don't even work in some cases. When I asked one guy to leave one time because he was parked out in front of the gate, he literally was, my car doesn't even run. I'm just living in it. And so he had to physically push it down the street to another location. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I've seen a lot of factors really change the dynamic here.
Yeah, our polling, we have a national poll of small business owners we do called the SBIQ poll. And in it, nearly 1/3 of small businesses say that increased homelessness is reducing their earnings. We actually drilled down and asked, okay, what aspect of the increased crime is hurting your earnings? And they said it's this homelessness issue and the kind of the public decay and disorder. How do you see this homeless crisis and these junkies affecting Phoenix's small business community?
Well, there are several businesses that we frequent in this area, and they have to deal with this along with trying to serve their customers. And I've literally seen folks walk in and just take drinks and things like that from gas stations, from places like McDonald's. Where was I the other day? There was another little cafe. I was having breakfast. Someone walked in, just took coffee and walked out. I was like, wow, I'm paying for this. These folks are just coming in and taking things, using the restrooms, leaving them in a bad state. I have a mechanic that's literally a block. I drop off my truck and walk to work, and you have to step over several people to get in the door. I'm sure that they've had the same issues I've had with vandalism, theft, safety issues, and so forth. There was a restaurant, Old Station, that was literally right in proximity to the zone, and they were having the same problem. Miraculously, they were able to stay open, and the zone has been cleared out by and large, but there are a lot of homeless people still down in the Phoenix area. And I think your point is a great one, Jordan, but I also think there is another issue that we face, and that is the policy and this idea that the city is going to remain hands off. And unfortunately, that's given folks this idea that they have license to do whatever they want.
Steve, I read that the zone was cleared out as a result of some litigation that was brought by the local small business owners. Talk about that litigation. Who were they suing, and what exactly was the defense in it? Was it the city of Phoenix that was being sued, or the state?
That's my understanding. So the city was basically not dealing with this issue, and there were several property owners that said, enough's enough, and filed a lawsuit. And the courts obviously, let the city know that they needed to, deal with this issue and clear it out. It was my understanding they found another location to relocate. I have not confirmed that, but it was my understanding that they were looking at state land property, and it was further south. Big challenge in Arizona, as you well know, is the heat in the summer. And quite frankly, I do not know how people who are outside when it's 115 degrees are able to deal with and cope with it. The sun is really tough on the skin, and obviously you've got to drink a lot to stay hydrated and so forth. So it becomes a very desperate situation in the summer.
It doesn't sound like the litigation and even the court's decision even comes close to addressing the problem of the homelessness. Although I read that the small business owners can be reimbursed for costs associated with vandalism and other things if it's because of the homelessness. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way that works, there was a bill that went through both the House and Senate. So I'm grateful for Speaker Toma and also President Warren Peterson for helping support this and get it through. They had sponsored what we call mirror bills in the House and Senate. And they went through, and basically part of their state shared revenues, that is the city, would be in jeopardy if they didn't address some of these issues, or if, let's say, a business owner or a homeowner for that matter, had to incur costs for security, cleanup of vandalism or damage, theft, all that sort of thing, then they have an opportunity to be remunerated for that.
What would you like to see done, more? Because it sounds like first, it sounds like another San Francisco, to be honest with you. I mean, it sounds like you're dealing with levels of homelessness and crime and drug use at those levels. What would you like to see done? Because even though the zone's been moved and they've simply relocated the crisis to someone else's backyard, you're still dealing with it on a weekly basis, even though it's not daily anymore. What would you like to see done?
Well, boy, that brings up a lot of different things that come to mind. First of all, as I mentioned before, you've got folks like House of Refuge. They have a large facility with lots of units where folks can transfer off the streets and get wraparound services to help them get back on their feet. You've got Community Housing Partnership and my good friend Nancy Marion, who does an amazing job of not only handing out blessing bags, but helping provide services and housing for folks. And I mentioned the Phoenix Rescue Mission. They do an amazing job of helping people, not only with getting them off the streets, but getting them off drugs and so forth. Depending on what they need, maybe it's mental health services or any number of other things. I would like, to see the state tackle this issue in a way that, also meaningful. Likewise, one of the things that I have a heart for and concerns about are the amount of kids in foster care and are in group homes that end up transitioning. And I heard a disturbing statistic recently, and it had to do with how many of these kids end up incarcerated on drugs or homeless as a result of not being able to successfully, transition from wards of the state to, a productive life. And so anyway, there are a lot of folks that are working really hard on that issue. I know East Valley Institute of Technology just did a ribbon cutting on a dorm for students that will then be able to get their certification so they can go to work and, live on campus and get, as I mentioned before, those wraparound services. So there are a lot of different groups that are helping tackle this problem. The state needs to do that. I think the city needs to change some policies, and that's not just, right here where I am. I'm not picking on the city of Phoenix. It's a rampant problem in many of the cities in Arizona. And I think a lot of that has to do with how mayors and councils choose to address these issues.
Steve, you mentioned over the course of the interview a few of the factors driving this crisis. We have the drug epidemic, we have mental health epidemic, then we have high housing costs. Depending on where you fall in the political spectrum, I think some people might highlight some of those over others. How do you really see the breakdown there of those three factors? And I guess my question, to put kind of a hard question to you, do you think that more housing and cheaper housing can really help solve the problem if so much of it's driven by drug use and mental health crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not being an expert on all of those things, I don't really know how to answer that, but your point is well taken. I do think, the mental health issues are rampant, as evidenced by some of the behaviors that we see right out on the streets. And it's hard sometimes to discern, is this drug induced? Is this something else? I'm certainly not a doctor to know that, but at the end of the day, I know that one of the things that is going to, have to happen is we're going to have to address both of those, I think, simultaneously. And I do know there have been efforts because the legislature, no matter which side of the aisle you're talking about, all recognize that this is a big problem that needs to be addressed. And I think they're chipping away at that. Do I think we have a solution other than people who are willing to jump in, roll up their sleeves and say, we can help you? I think about the Hope Coach, and they go out and they say, they assess folks and they assess their willingness to get help. And that's key because to your point, folks have to want to come off the streets. And oddly enough, I thought they did, by and large, and some folks are happy where they are. That's surprising to many, but that's what I'm finding. And unfortunately, it would take changing that mentality in order to, and I don't know what that's going to take, because I don't know who's working on, trying to, obviously mental health, there are folks that deal with that. There are a great deal of people who deal with just bringing people out of homelessness that want the help. But this idea that people actually prefer that lifestyle is a hard one to get my head around. And I don't know who's changing minds on that front.
I couldn't agree with you more. This is a very sad issue from every direction you come at it, whether it's, as Jordan mentioned, the mental health epidemic, the drug addiction epidemic, but there's also the issue of the open border that feeds some of the drug epidemic as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways we could come at that, but obviously that's for another discussion on another episode. I do want to thank you for sharing your up close observations about the crime problem within the communities, because it's been something that we're looking at because our polling is starting to show our small business owners are being affected. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters today, America's small business megaphone. And thank you all for taking the time to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. And we'll be back soon.